Table 6 needs their check, and the kitchen's backed up on orders for 12 and 15. My assistant manager, David, appeared at my shoulder with his usual evening urgency as I reviewed the night's receipts at the host station. Tuesday evenings at Harvest were typically manageable, but tonight felt different. The energy was charged, almost electric, in a way that made my instincts prickle. I had been running restaurants for 22 years, starting as a dishwasher at 16 and clawing my way up through every position imaginable. Now, at 38, I owned 5 successful establishments across the metro area, with Harvest being my flagship location in the heart of downtown. The mahogany bar gleamed under warm Edison bulb lighting, and the open kitchen allowed diners to watch my chefs work their magic with locally sourced ingredients. Everything about this place reflected the vision I'd built from nothing. Tell Kitchen to prioritize 12. They're celebrating an anniversary, I instructed David, making a note in my leather-bound manager's log. And send Table 6 a complimentary dessert with their check. The gentleman mentioned it's his wife's birthday. David nodded and hurried away. These details mattered. They were the difference between a good restaurant and a great one, between customers who returned once and those who became regulars. Every decision, every interaction, every perfectly timed course was part of a symphony I'd spent decades learning to conduct. I was adjusting the fresh orchid arrangement near the entrance when the front door burst open with enough force to rattle the glass. The hostess, Jennifer, jumped back as a figure strode through the doorway like he owned the place. My stomach dropped before my brain even processed who it was. Marcus, my older brother by 3 years, though you'd never know it from his behavior. He looked exactly the same as when I'd last seen him 4 years ago at our father's funeral, just a little grayer around the temples, and wearing what appeared to be an expensive suit that somehow managed to look cheap on him. His face carried that familiar expression of righteous indignation that had defined our childhood interactions. "Where is she?" Marcus demanded of Jennifer, his voice booming across the dining room. Several customers turned to stare, their conversations faltering. "Where's my sister?" Jennifer's eyes found mine, wide with uncertainty. I straightened my shoulders and walked toward him, my heels clicking against the polished concrete floors. Every step felt measured, deliberate. I wasn't the scared little sister anymore who used to hide in the kitchen pantry when Marcus brought his friends over. "Hello, Marcus," I said evenly, stopping just close enough to keep our conversation from becoming a complete spectacle. "What brings you to my restaurant?" His laugh was bitter, the same dismissive sound I remembered from our teenage years when he'd mock my dreams of opening my own place. "Your restaurant? That's rich, considering Dad built this empire." I felt my jaw tighten, but kept my expression neutral. "Dad never owned a restaurant, Marcus. You know that. Don't play stupid with me, Victoria." He stepped closer, and I caught the faint scent of alcohol on his breath. Day drinking, apparently. Some things never changed. The family business. All of this. He gestured broadly at the dining room, the bar, the carefully curated atmosphere I'd spent years perfecting. Dad always said it should be split equally between his children. The absurdity of the statement hit me like a physical blow. Marcus, who had left home at 18 to join a friend's band and had spent the last 20 years drifting between odd jobs and get-rich-quick schemes. Marcus, who hadn't spoken to our father for the final 5 years of his life, because Dad refused to loan him money for yet another failed venture. Marcus, who couldn't be bothered to help when Dad was dying of cancer, leaving me to handle everything from medical decisions to funeral arrangements. "You're drunk," I said quietly, "and you're disturbing my customers. I think you should leave." His face flushed red, the way it always did when someone challenged him. I'm not going anywhere until we settle this. Dad always promised that his kids would inherit equally. You can't just cut me out because you were the favorite. The favorite. The word was so ludicrous I almost laughed. I had been the one who stayed close to home, who visited Dad every Sunday, who held his hand during chemotherapy treatments while Marcus was somewhere in California claiming to be finding himself. I had been the one who paid Dad's medical bills when his insurance fell short, who organized his medications, who made sure he had groceries and companionship during his final months. But I hadn't done any of that for inheritance or recognition. I'd done it because it was right, because he was my father, and because Marcus had made it clear years earlier that family obligations weren't his priority. Marcus, you need to calm down, I said, my voice still steady despite the rage building in my chest. We can discuss this privately in my office if you'd like, but not here. Not in front of my customers. Your customers? He laughed again, louder this time. Several diners were now openly staring, their meals forgotten. These are family business customers, Victoria. Dad started this legacy, and I'm here to claim my half. That's when something inside me snapped. Not visibly, not dramatically, but with the quiet finality of a door closing. Marcus had no idea what he was talking about. None whatsoever. And suddenly, I realized I was done pretending he did. I walked calmly to the host station and retrieved my leather portfolio from the drawer beneath the reservation system. Inside were copies of every important document related to my businesses, organized with the same precision I applied to everything else in my life. My fingers found the folder I needed without hesitation. You want to discuss the family business? I asked, returning to where Marcus stood with his arms crossed, looking smug and entitled. Let's discuss it. I opened the folder and withdrew a thick stack of papers, each page meticulously organized and labeled. The incorporation documents for Victoria's Hospitality Group, dated 15 years ago. The business licenses. The loan applications I'd filled out myself, using my own credit and my own collateral. The property deeds. The insurance policies. Every piece of paper that proved what I'd built had nothing to do with our father's legacy, and everything to do with my own sweat, sacrifice, and sleepless nights. But the document I handed him was special. It was the agreement Marcus himself had signed when I'd first incorporated my business. I'd been naive enough, hopeful enough, to include him in the early paperwork, just in case he ever decided to be part of the family again, just in case he wanted to be involved in something legitimate and lasting. Read the last page, I said, my voice calm as still water. Marcus scanned the document, his confidence wavering as he recognized his own signature. The section I'd highlighted in yellow was brief but clear. Marcus Antonio Chin hereby relinquishes any and all claims, current or future, to Victoria's Hospitality Group and any subsidiary businesses, properties, or assets. This agreement is binding and irrevocable. The color drained from his face as the words sank in. I don't remember signing this. You signed it at the lawyer's office on March 15th, 15 years ago, I said evenly. You were 26, you said, and I quote, I don't want anything to do with the restaurant business. It's too much work and not enough adventure. You were planning to move to Portland with that girlfriend of yours. Stephanie, I think her name was. Marcus stared at the paper like it might burst into flames. Around us, the restaurant had grown quiet. Even the kitchen seemed to have paused its usual clatter of plates and conversation. You tricked me, he said finally, his voice weak. I protected myself, I corrected. Something I learned to do when you walked away from everything, including Dad. The mention of our father hit its mark. Marcus flinched, and for a moment, I saw not the entitled man who just tried to claim half my life's work, but the scared boy who'd run away from responsibility every time it got difficult. Dad always said. Dad never said the family business should be split equally. I'd interrupted, my patience finally exhausted. Because there was no family business to split. There was just me, working 7 days a week, saving every penny, building something from nothing while you were off pursuing your dreams. And when you finally decided you wanted a piece of what I'd built, you assumed you could just walk in and demand it. Marcus looked around the restaurant, taking in the full dining room, the efficient staff, the obvious success of what I'd created. For the first time since he'd walked through the door, he seemed to understand the magnitude of what he tried to claim. Victoria, he started to speak, then stopped. What could he say? That he'd spent 20 years ignoring our family, and now deserved half of everything I'd worked for. That his signature on a legal document didn't count because he'd been too irresponsible to read what he was signing. You need to leave, I said quietly. Now. He opened his mouth as if to argue, then seemed to think better of it. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by something that looked almost like shame. Almost. This isn't over, he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. Yes, it is. I folded the documents and returned them to my portfolio. It's been over for 15 years. You just never bothered to remember. Marcus stood there for another moment, seeming smaller somehow in his expensive suit. Then he turned and walked toward the door, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Jennifer held it open for him, and he disappeared into the evening without another word. The restaurant was completely silent for several seconds. Then, gradually, conversations resumed. Silverware clinked against plates. The kitchen sounds returned. Life moved forward, as it always did. David appeared at my side, his expression concerned. Boss, everything okay? I straightened my jacket and checked my watch. 8:30. The evening rush was winding down. But there were still customers to serve, a kitchen to manage, a business to run. The business I'd built without help, without handouts, without family backing of any kind. Everything's fine, I told David. Check on table 12's dessert, and make sure the kitchen knows about the special dietary request for table 9. As David hurried away, I returned to my position at the host station and opened my manager's log. There were notes to make, schedules to review, orders to place for tomorrow's deliveries. The work never stopped, and I wouldn't have it any other way. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at the screen, expecting to see something work-related, but the number was unfamiliar. This is Marcus. I'm staying at the Marriott downtown. We should talk. I stared at the message for a moment, then deleted it without responding. Some conversations weren't worth having, especially with someone who'd already said everything they needed to say 15 years ago when they'd signed away their claim to my life. The next morning, I arrived at Harvest early, as I always did. The restaurant was quiet, peaceful in the way only empty restaurants can be. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, highlighting dust motes dancing in the air above the polished tables. This was my favorite time of day, before the controlled chaos of service began, when I could walk through my space and remember why I'd fallen in love with this business in the first place. I was reviewing inventory reports in my office when Jennifer knocked on the doorframe. Victoria? There's someone here to see you. Says he's your brother. My stomach clenched. Tell him we're closed. He's not alone, Jennifer continued. There's a woman with him. Older. She says she's a lawyer. I set down my pen and considered my options. Marcus had clearly spent the night thinking about our conversation, probably researching ways to contest the agreement he'd signed. The fact that he'd brought legal representation suggested he was serious about pursuing this further. Fine. If he wanted to do this the hard way, I was prepared. Send them to the private dining room, I told Jennifer. I'll be there in 5 minutes. I took those 5 minutes to gather everything I needed. Not just the incorporation documents, but the complete file on Victoria's Hospitality Group. Financial records showing 15 years of steady growth. Property deeds for all 5 restaurant locations. Business licenses. Tax returns. Partnership agreements with suppliers and vendors. Bank statements showing every loan payment, every investment, every dollar I'd earned and reinvested in my businesses. By the time I walked into the private dining room, Marcus and his lawyer were seated at the round table where I usually hosted wine tastings for VIP customers. The lawyer was a thin woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and an expensive briefcase. She looked competent, which meant this conversation was going to require my full attention. Ms. Chen, the lawyer said, standing to shake my hand. I'm Patricia Hendricks from Hendricks, Walsh and Associates. Your brother has asked me to review some documents regarding your business interests. I shook her hand and took a seat across from them, placing my own folder on the table. I assume Marcus has shown you the incorporation agreement? He has, she replied. And I have to say, it raises some interesting questions about the circumstances under which it was signed. Marcus leaned forward, his confidence apparently restored by legal backup. I was 26, Victoria, young and stupid. I didn't understand what I was signing. You were 26 and a college graduate, I corrected. You had a degree in business administration from State University. You understood exactly what you were signing, which is why you asked me to include the clause about being free to pursue other opportunities without interference. Patricia consulted her notes. My client believes he may have grounds to contest the agreement based on lack of full disclosure about the potential value of the business at the time of signing. I opened my folder and withdrew a thick stack of papers. These are copies of every document Marcus received before signing the incorporation agreement. Business plan, financial projections, market analysis, risk assessment. He was given 2 weeks to review everything with his own legal counsel before making a decision. I slid the papers across the table. That's his signature on the receipt acknowledging he'd received and reviewed all materials. Patricia examined the documents while Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I could see him trying to remember those weeks 15 years ago, probably realizing that I'd been more thorough than he'd given me credit for. Furthermore, I continued. Marcus was offered a partnership position at the time. 30% ownership in exchange for a $15,000 investment and a commitment to work in the business for at least 5 years. He declined, stating that he preferred to maintain his freedom rather than be tied down to one location. I retrieved another document from my folder. This is the written record of that conversation, which Marcus also signed. The lawyer studied the papers for several minutes while Marcus stared at the table. When she finally looked up, her expression had changed. The confident challenge was gone, replaced by professional resignation. Mr. Chen, she said carefully, based on these documents, I don't believe you have grounds for a legal challenge. The incorporation agreement appears to have been executed properly, with full disclosure and adequate time for consideration. Marcus's face went red. But the family business. There was no family business, Patricia interrupted gently. According to these records, Your sister started her company with her own capital and her own credit. Your father doesn't appear to have had any ownership interest or involvement in the business. He gave her the idea. Marcus insisted desperately. He always talked about opening a restaurant. Talking about something and actually doing it are very different things, I said. Dad dreamed about a lot of things. Playing professional baseball, writing a novel, opening a restaurant. But dreaming and building aren't the same thing. The room fell silent. Patricia was organizing her papers, clearly preparing to leave. Marcus was staring at his hands, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. There is one option, Patricia said carefully. Your sister could choose to voluntarily modify the original agreement. Create a new partnership structure, if she were so inclined. Both of them looked at me expectantly. Marcus's eyes held a desperate hope that made him look younger. More like the brother I'd once idolized before I learned that admiration was a one-way street in our family. I considered the proposal for exactly 3 seconds. No, I said simply. Marcus's face crumpled. Victoria, please. I'm family. Family, I repeated slowly. Where was family when I was working 3 jobs to save money for my first restaurant? Where was family when I spent 6 months sleeping in the back office because I couldn't afford both rent and restaurant equipment? Where was family when Dad was dying and I was handling everything alone? I stood up, gathering my documents. You had 15 years to be family, Marcus. You chose adventure instead. You chose freedom. You chose to walk away every time things got difficult. And now you want to walk back in and claim half of what I built while you were gone. I made mistakes, he said quietly. You made choices, I corrected. And so did I. I chose to stay. I chose to work. I chose to build something lasting. And I chose to protect it from people who only show up when there's something to gain. Patricia closed her briefcase with a decisive snap. Mr. Chen, I think we're finished here. I'll send you a full written assessment. But my preliminary opinion is that your sister's position is legally sound. After they left, I sat alone in the private dining room for several minutes, looking out at the main dining area where my staff was setting up for the lunch service. In a few hours, this place would be full of customers enjoying meals prepared by chefs I'd trained, served by waitstaff I'd hired, in an atmosphere I'd created from nothing. Marcus had called it the family business, but he was wrong. This wasn't a family business. It was my business, built on my terms, with my vision, through my dedication. The fact that I shared DNA with someone who wanted to claim it didn't make it theirs. My phone buzzed with another text from Marcus. Can we please talk without lawyers? Just us. I read the message twice, then typed my response. We did talk. 15 years ago. You said you wanted nothing to do with the restaurant business. I respected your choice then, and I'm holding you to it now. I hit send and blocked his number. 3 months later, I was reviewing plans for my 6th restaurant location when David knocked on my office door. Boss, there's a guy outside who says he's your brother. He's not causing trouble, just sitting in his car across the street. Thought you should know. I looked out my window and saw Marcus's rental car parked under a streetlight. He'd been coming by once or twice a week, never entering, never confronting me, just sitting there like he was working up the courage for something. Leave him alone, I told David. He's not hurting anyone. You sure? I could call the police if he's harassing you. He's not harassing me, I said. He's just figuring out what he lost. That evening, as I locked up the restaurant, I walked past Marcus's car on my way to the parking garage. He rolled down his window as I approached. Victoria, he said quietly. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Not for trying to get part of your business, but for not being there when you were building it. And for not being there when Dad needed us." I stopped walking but didn't move closer to the car. "Okay. I know I can't undo 20 years of being absent," he continued. "And I know you don't owe me anything. I just wanted you to know that I see what you built here. And I'm proud of you, even if I don't deserve to be." For a moment, I saw the brother I'd once looked up to, before he chose an escape over responsibility, before he decided that family was optional. It was tempting to soften, to offer some kind of reconciliation or olive branch. But forgiveness and trust were different things, and trust, once broken repeatedly, couldn't be repaired with apologies alone. "Thank you for saying that," I told him, "but it doesn't change anything." He nodded, understanding. "I know, I just needed to say it." Marcus rolled up his window and drove away. I never saw him again, though I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd moved back to California and was working as a restaurant manager for someone else's chain. Apparently, he'd finally developed an appreciation for the business he'd once dismissed as too much work. 5 years later, I opened my 10th restaurant location. The Food Critic from the city's largest newspaper wrote a feature article about my restaurant empire, calling me one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the hospitality industry. The article mentioned my humble beginnings, my innovative approach to local sourcing, and my commitment to employee development. It didn't mention Marcus at all. Why would it? He'd never been part of the story I was writing. As I stood in the kitchen of my newest location, watching my chefs prepare for the opening night service, I thought about the choices that had led me here. Every sacrifice, every risk, every moment when I could have given up but didn't. Every person who had doubted me, dismissed me, or underestimated what I was capable of achieving. Marcus had been wrong about the family business. This wasn't something I'd inherited or been handed. This was something I'd earned, one customer, one meal, one perfectly executed service at a time. And no one, family or otherwise, could take that away from me. The dinner rush was about to begin, and I had a restaurant to run.